In your adventure, basically, player characters or your character itself is going to be interacting with kind of two basic things, either creatures or non player characters or NPCs. Now, the big difference is generally speaking, an NPC might be someone who is important, someone who you might run into a lot of times. And generally speaking, they are going to be something that you interact a lot more with. And they will probably be under a lot more consideration or comparison with characters. So, generally speaking, you need to be a little bit more precise in building an NPC. Now, both the Game Mastery Guide and the new remaster GM Core give some really good advice for building NPCs, and I thought we'd go ahead and take a look at that today. So, with that, my name is Don. I'm trying to be the Sly Strategist, and let's go ahead and get into it. So, one of the big differentiators between a non player character and a creature is that non player characters are generally closely aligned with character classes, or they represent people that the players are going to be interacting with. An NPC you will generally deal with a lot more during downtime and in exploration. However, you could actually meet them in an encounter mode, and creatures are going to be a lot of times done in encounter mode with you running across them in exploration and rarely in downtime. Although, it just depends on that particular adventure that you and your party have decided to kind of go on. Now, non player characters or NPCs may undergo, and I like how they put it in the book, more scrutiny regarding their mechanics. And that is mainly because a lot of times they are going to cleave a little bit more closer to a player character. So player characters could go ahead, and an example they have is a rogue NPC. The rogue player character might want to compare themselves against as to how they're built, what their skills are, and depending on their level, just how well that they could compare to this particular NPC. Now, NPCs do not have to be built exactly like a player character, and you shouldn't feel limited to doing that. But if your NPC is going to be similar to player characters, then you would use the class features and feats of a suitable class to determine whatever abilities they might have. You can refer to the class proficiencies and attribute modifiers to gauge whatever statistics that they are going to have. And GM Core has a really good roadmap set up, and we'll go ahead and kind of pop over to that real quick just so that you can see what we're kind of talking about. But there is a whole list of class roadmaps that are available to you in GM Core. And we could take an example here, and we can go ahead and take a look at the monk. The monk has high acrobatics, has athletics or both, high strength or dexterity, moderate wisdom, higher extreme AC, and moderate attack and high damage. And it has a list of abilities that you might want to give that particular NPC in order to kind of help along the adventure and to making these NPCs just a little bit easier. Now, there are going to be some NPCs with unique roles. And when we say unique roles, that basically means non-player characters that don't specifically represent or resemble a player character class. And it should kind of be built separately. And a good example for this would be, let's say you're in town and you have a baker. That is the example from the book, but it could be a swordsmith. It could be anything that you might see in a village or might be support for the player character's party. Now, you can feel free to create whatever new abilities as necessary to express the non-player character's theme and role, and you can get into as far as that as you want to. A good example of this would be you could have a baker. Now, we'll say the baker bakes bagels, and that is what they do. If the player characters want to have some type of party for the town or something along those lines, well, that particular baker might not be skilled enough in order to perform that action in order to bake a large cake or a mass number of pastries. So you might have to go to a larger town to meet a higher level baker in order to be able to accommodate those particular things that you need to do. Now, the NPCs that kind of have these unique abilities, they can be level -1 or level 0, and they typically are going to have simple capabilities. Now, if your NPC is going to follow a little bit more along the lines of a player character class, then you would select the NPC skills using proficiency ranks. very similar to player characters, and you would adjust the proficiency levels according to the non-player character's role and expertise. You don't have to cleave too closely, and you don't have to make every single little decision, but you need to ensure that they are kind of fleshed out so that you can go ahead and actually play them as an actual character. And then you can also feel free to give them access to things like expert or master, different proficiency levels, either earlier or later, just depending on what is useful in your own particular campaign. Now, as far as non-combat level for these NPCs, in order to help you determine kind of the experience points player characters would get for interacting with the NPCs, well, the NPC's level should reflect combat prowess, but non-combat encounters may require different levels. And just because an NPC is important in a campaign, an adventure, an encounter, or exploration or during downtime, it does not mean that they have a high combat level, and the challenge to them might have nothing to do with combat at all. Now, they do actually have on page 31 of the GM core another little thing that talks about non-combat level, and it basically states that a creature's level measures its acumen in combat, but some creatures who would be pushovers in battle can be dangerous in social situations and encounters and other challenges. Such creatures typically have high skill modifiers and mental defenses much higher than their levels would indicate. So if you are going to have a very scheming chancellor of a city or country or something along those lines, feel free to give them higher skill modifiers in order to accommodate those things and kind of take that into consideration when awarding XP for defeating an NPC in a social encounter based on the relevant level of that particular encounter. In this case, it would be a social encounter rather than the creature's combat level. And then they give a good example here of an NPC with an ability, and the example is a courtroom specialist in a court case or other legal proceedings. The judge is a 6th level challenge, so you would treat that for XP purposes as defeating a 6th level challenge. And feel free to adjust these non-combat levels to suit the non-player character's area of expertise. Now, for non-combat XP, which we've just kind of talked about, experience points gained from defeating NPCs depend on how the challenge is overcome. So player characters will receive their experience points based on the NPC's non-combat or creature level, depending on the encounter. Once again, we can go back to what they were saying with a courtroom specialist. If it's in a courtroom, you'd give them experience based on a 6th level. But if you met that same character and you were trying to win something against them in the auction, well, their courtroom specialization might not help them there, so they would be at a lower level in that particular encounter. Now, you can do NPCs as a player character style build, and NPCs built using player character rules should provide an appropriate challenge as a character of that level. So if you are going to have a party of 4th level characters and they are going to be doing something against an NPC that is potentially 6th or 7th level, then it should be a challenge based on that 6th or 7th level. Or if they are going to be just a 4th level NPC, then it should be based on the 4th level NPC. Now, building an NPC based off a player character style build is really saved for really important or recurring NPCs, especially if they're meant to engage with the player characters in social or exploration rather than just battles, simply because you're going to be meeting them more often. And the intricacies, how they react, how their charisma is, how they can be deceptive, how they can be intimidating, these things are all important outside of an encounter. Now, they have a good list of considerations and what they're calling shortcuts that can really expedite the process when creating these NPCs to ensure that they are functional. And first one is going to be a pretty simple one, which is follow treasure rules for new characters. So you can determine basically what type of gear they have, if they have any type of special equipment or equipment with modifiers or items with modifiers that might help them. You can streamline attribute modifier generation, and the starting attribute modifiers should add up to basically a +9 and no more than 1 negative modifier, simply because that's generally how that works for player characters. You can do this and you can skip adding a background, but if you do skip adding a background, you might want to give the creature 2 skills, which includes 1 lore skill, which represents the skills that would be gained if you gave that NPC a background. Now, it is not necessary to assign every skill feat, but just like that NPC with a courtroom specialization, you would select emblematic skill feats that would kind of fit in with the NPC that you're trying to create. And if you can't think of anything, you can consider feats like incredible initiative and toughness as kind of good base feats to give a NPC. And you would choose spells with utility for non-combat challenges, specifically if this isn't going to be used in combat. And the book actually recommends specifically for lower level slots, choosing these utility spells in order to kind of facilitate these encounters with the NPCs in order to make them more memorable, more fun for the GM to play, and more fun for the player characters to interact with. Now, I do hope you like this little guide on NPC creation. NPCs can be a lot of fun, and the more work you put into them when you're building them, the more fun they are to play, the more memorable they are to the player characters, and basically the more that they will bring to your particular adventure that you're trying to create. Now, I do hope you like this video, and if you did, feel free to like, subscribe, or hit that notification bell. But whatever you do, I hope you have a great day and happy adventuring. Thanks.